Well, ladies and gents, we're going to move on now to our next speaker, and rather appropriate that our next speaker is Simon Rawlinson from Arcadis, but here today as a member of the Construction Leadership Council, which really has been responsible for showing tremendous leadership since lockdown first time round in March. I'm not going to say too much because I know Simon's going to cover quite a lot during the next 20 minutes. But Simon, delighted you could give up some of your valuable time to join us. I've shared several platforms with you, and I know the next 20 minutes is going to be hugely valuable. Over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I really enjoyed Andrew's presentation. Andrew was the construction minister for a period. He was very active, very supportive of the work of the CLC. And I have to say that his successor, Nadeem Zahawi, has been absolutely fantastic. So there is I've been with the CLC now for 5 years, and I have to say that the links with government have got progressively stronger. So if one thinks of, we got through firstly the sector deal and subsequently working with ministers in response to COVID, it really is a very positive and strong relationship, and that will continue. So hopefully you can see the screen. This is going to be a sort of whistle-stop tour, a quick reminder of what the CLC is about, just to remind ourselves that it is about more than responding to COVID. Then I'm going to talk about the recovery plan, and then in particular the detail of some of that, and just to give people a flavour of what it's about. And it's mostly about actually the kind of wider outcomes to the industry, the long-term plan, rather than the short-term recovery, which I want to sort of emphasise, because rather like the minister's presentation about HS2 being a driver for industry transformation, again, the recovery very much. So in terms of moving on from the point of view of what I'm going to talk about, the first thing I just want to briefly touch on is, of course, the lockdown that in England has started this morning. And if one goes back to the lockdown in March, that created quite a lot of confusion and disruption for the industry. So I thought it was just worthwhile reminding everybody of where we stay at the moment. So this is lockdown 101. So we've had really positive and proactive communication from government, including from the Prime Minister, that all construction sites should remain open. And that also extends to, say, for example, the sales offices of house builders as well. So some of the confusion that occurred in March should not apply. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that the rest of the economy understands that. So the CLC is being very proactive on our communication with government departments, say, for example, to the police forces and others, to make sure that construction workers, delivery vans and such like can continue unencumbered. Site operating procedures have gone through various minor iterations, and they have been minor. We're on version 6, which has some slight refinements around face coverings, but in principle, the arrangements that were put in place in March remain the same, and they, of course, have been very effective, and that they apply across all sectors. So they support the RM&I sector, house building, and such like. Again, going down to the kinds of work that can continue, repair and maintenance, an enormously important sector as we saw during the lockdown, and actually particularly since the lockdown during the summer, RM&I has been really quite busy, quite active. It's been a massive support to the material sector, so that again can continue. And finally, and again, just an important recollection on some of the disruptions that occurred during March and April, that the builders merchant sector is fully open and fully operational, and manufacturers are keeping their lines open. So if you can imagine, one of the concerns that have been immediately raised this week has been, say, for example, issues around the availability of plasterboard. And again, we're getting assurance from the manufacturers that lines are remaining open. So it's not easy. I think there's no glib statements about this being a period that is easy for the industry, but there's a huge amount of effort being put in to make sure that people are clear that they can continue to operate. So without that, I'm just now going to quickly recap on the CLC, and you'll see below at the bottom of that slide there are a few what you might describe as foundation documents that underpin the kind of changes that the CLC is introducing. And what you'll also start to see is that the kind of themes around infrastructure efficiency, around government platforms, around productivity, these things are all coming together in lots of different initiatives, particularly in the construction playbook, which we can talk about as an idea that's coming quite soon, but we can't necessarily talk about in detail. But nevertheless, that all of the things that I've been presenting, and I probably talked to some of the people on this call maybe a year, 18 months ago, they are very definitely on the agenda, and they will become mandatory under government guidance to their effectively the government client bodies. So going on to the next slide, then just remind ourselves what our purpose is. The principal purpose is to deliver the sector deal. So let's not forget that. And of course, we've now got a secondary purpose, which is convening the industry and organising ourselves around the COVID response in particular. So, and I have to say that, you know, again, this is a slide that's been around for a bit. So you might have said, say, 12 months ago that there was a bit of a theory. I think that is now absolutely clear that that role is in place, because we have a very, very effective task group and governance structure that is based on all of the main industry bodies. So it's a very powerful and very harmonious group of organizations all going in the same direction. So fantastic progress there. Now, one of the things we mustn't forget, and I think we sometimes keep doing so, is that, again, we have our 2025 goals. Originally, when they were set, they were 13 years away. Now they're 5, but they're still there. We know that they can be achieved because certain client organizations have achieved them, but not everybody. So that's something which we continue to raise and bring people's attentions. And then the various initiatives that are coming through. So if one thinks about now building safety and net zero carbon, really important, and CLC is very much behind those. And just without reminding everybody about those targets, they're still there: lower cost, faster delivery, lower emissions. And if you think about government's project speed, it is all about, again, embedding these ambitions, not just because they've been there for a long time, but actually there's a renewed importance around them, say, for example, around the COP26 agenda. So just quickly articulating the position of the CLC. So we work with lots of different organizations, some of them directly represented, say, for example, like many of the client groups and public sector bodies. So the IPA sits with us, and we work indirectly with others, academic institutions and such like. But it's a very busy ecosystem. There's lots of links, some we're closer to than others, but actually it's fair to say that what was previously a very disparate set of bodies is increasingly working in a very effective and coordinated way. And again, changes introduced over the last 12 months or so have brought some of these things together, particularly around things like the Digital Framework Task Group, which is dealing with digital twins and such like, and now that is again represented on the CLC. Now, I could have put a structure diagram up on the screen, but it's so complicated that I thought the best thing to do was suggest that you go to the refreshed website, which has got a whole lot of very useful information, together with information about COVID and Brexit, and basically you can sort of get that all there. So rather than me spending time on that. So onto the COVID crisis and then the recovery plan. So again, I think there's often the idea that you forge organizations in a crisis, that they get their structure and character when you have a real challenge. And it's fair to say that under the leadership of Andy Mitchell and Zadim Zahawi, it really has come together in a really effective way. And these organisations here pretty much comprise now the active executive of the CLC, and they're all big organisations. They have a lot of leverage, they have a lot of resource. So going from being a sort of an organisation that was reliant on a lot of part-time activity by people like me, we now are able to sort of get into much more resource around communications and such like. So a really strong collaborative response with a lot of capability coming in there. Now, from the point of view of the task group, it was actually up and running before the lockdown started. There was the objective was there to develop collaborative responses to urgent challenges such as site operations, and that has morphed now towards things like PI insurance. It's morphed to areas around Brexit and such like. So it's almost like you could say we now have the ability to respond to any challenge that meets the industry rather than just COVID. So that's actually a really powerful capability the industry has. That engagement with government has continued and has strengthened. So we've mentioned a couple of times the construction playbook. Now, there has been a very large amount of consultation with industry. I think there's about 600 inputs or such like, but the CLC has been very coordinated in the way that we've dealt with that. And we promoted particular areas which we think are important. So for example, the value agenda, the industry profitability agenda, the importance of a sort of long-term visible pipeline of work and such like. And a lot of those messages have landed. So with all of these things, you know, with good things comes challenges. So it will be a slightly different landscape, but I think one which is very positive in terms of the sort of long-term health of the industry. And we've also then developed the recovery plan. Now, I'm not going to go through these outputs, but I'll just highlight that we've moved from emergency measures, such as one that I will highlight, which is the talent retention scheme, which was developed in partnership with the ACE and BAYS, and that is effectively enabling people who have, say, for example, been made redundant in one organisation to potentially be re-employed by another. So it's a portal that enables opportunities within the sectors, consultants and contractors and subcontractors, to be made visible. And that's been supported by BAYS until at least April next year. So, you know, a fantastic, again, proactive response to a problem. We're working at a sector level. So we'll talk about the recovery plan, but there's also stuff around a national retrofit plan aligned to this of the Green Homes Grant. The work that we're doing around expanding homes capacity and of course green regeneration as well. So there's some really big chunky issues being dealt with there. And then the industry priorities, I've already talked about net zero, building safety, digital, but there are other ones associated, say, for example, with exports as well. So lots and lots of stuff happening there. And what you can see is that the capacity of the CLC to deal with these issues has expanded significantly over the last 12 months. So now get on to the recovery plan. And again, because it's available on the website, I'm really just going to give it as of an outline. But the first thing to sort of highlight is that the objectives still are effectively around sort of like around driving a lot of things that we've been talking around for a long time. So it's around this issue of procuring for better value. So whole life value rather than cost, embedding better skills, in improving for around design and product selection around net zero carbon, such like. So the recovery plan is again part of a strategic transformation of the industry rather than something which is a sort of you could describe as being piecemeal. It has 3 stages. So we have a restart, and you could say, well, the restart should have finished now, but I mean, it's fair to say that this is going to be going on for a while. But there was a lot of stuff about making sure that projects could keep going, that we could keep employing people, and probably most importantly for a lot of people on the call is actually sort of minimize some of the disruption around construction claims and such like. And that seems to work pretty well, actually. The guidance around appropriate transfer and sharing of risk around delay and disruption has been accepted pretty widely. The reset phase is where we are really focused at the moment. So lots of work, say, for example, with the IPA around the pipeline. In fact, I was on a session earlier this week providing feedback on the pipeline, the procurement pipeline, which was published in July. So there's more in terms of how that can be made more useful. And then some things about, well, what early lessons around productivity can we take from the investment that's been made through the construction sector deal? And the work on training, collaborative business models, fairer contracts, that continues. And the long term in green, the reinvent, I think again is going to be particularly cemented in place by the development and publication of the playbook. So there are sort of issues around using new methods of construction. Some of the examples that the minister gave, different ways of procuring, particularly the value toolkit, procure for value toolkit, which is being developed by the Construction Innovation Hub at the moment, is being soft tested and it's likely to be launched in first quarter 2021. So that's again changing the way that government procures, enabling to actually sort of bring forward the social value commitments that which have been made earlier this autumn, and then this idea of partnership and aligning clients, consultants, contractors, the enterprise model, Project 13 and such like, embedding that more deeply in the way that we work. Now, I've got 3 slides which just extract from the plan. Again, I'm not going to go through them, but I'm just going to use them as a means of illustrating the kind of work that's been done and the way in which they've involved collaboration of different parties. So in terms of the restart, the 2 I'm going to highlight are down at the bottom there around extending working hours and extending planning expiry dates. So both practical steps that needed government help to enable the industry to either be more productive in terms of work on sites or to save value in existing planning consents that couldn't be developed out. So I think that's illustrative of a really pragmatic partnership response. In terms of the reset, the 2 I'm going to highlight there are, I think, firstly, the project pipeline. And the pipeline that was published in the summer was different to the wish list that is published typically with every sort of annual budget, because it was actual sort of live procurements. And so there was a really quite significant effort by IPA to identify those across hundreds of public bodies. So a real strong attempt by the public sector to help the industry. And I'm also going to highlight that the building safety and the acceleration of the ACM remediation program, which is proceeding, even though, of course, there are all these challenges around PII insurance and such like. So there's stuff happening there, and that is moving forward. And finally, on the reinvent, I'm just going to sort of highlight, I think, a couple of things which will be coming out of the playbook. And the first one is this implementation of the presumption of offsite. And I think we will see that accelerating, of course, subject to the ability of government to invest through the comprehensive spending review or the larger sort of longer spending commitments that might be provided. And I think it's fair to say that it's also encouraging the private sector clients, exemplified by the work that Land Securities, for example, are doing through their demonstration project supported by the hub, to again show how some of these technologies and such like can be used. And there's quite a lot of evidence that different offsite approaches, let's say, for example, prefabricated service risers and what have you, are really being the take up of those is being accelerated to respond to the productivity challenges around COVID. So I think that what that highlights is that these are intensely practical measures rather than being sort of like high up there theoretical stuff. They are things that make a difference and are actionable now. And it's a really good and workable plan. Now, in terms of the overall outputs and outcomes of these, again, I think it's important to reflect it's gone beyond an emergency plan to the acceleration of the transformation that we've been talking about for the past 5 years. So picking up some themes from the minister, in the end, we're about delivering investment outcomes. So the reason we're doing this is to make the country more productive, to create more jobs, to enable people to move around. We're also going to do it by reducing carbon emissions, so the sector is more sustainable, both in terms of what we do in terms of our impacts, but also, of course, our long-term economic sustainability. And the societal needs, the continuation of the delivery of housing during the crisis, I think, demonstrates the flexibility of the industry. And the regional recovery bit, I think, is one of the reasons why government has supported us so much, because they've recognised that actually an awful lot of the benefit that construction can be delivered happens outside of the southeast, and so we're very much part of that levelling up agenda. But there are also, on the right hand side, there are all of these opportunities to change the way that we work. And of course, it's going to be very, very difficult over the next two years or so in terms of investing in our businesses, investing in our futures. But in terms of the other side of the equation, helping us to do that, a little bit more transparency around where the work is coming from and such like will help there. But that agenda isn't going away. The need to invest in skills, training, competence and such like is very much there. So I'm going to wrap up on that line in terms of saying that whilst we're dealing with a recovery plan, it's always the plan that we had, which was to make us a more effective and more responsible industry. I'm delighted to continue to be involved in it. I'm delighted that we've been able to lift the effectiveness and the profile of the CLC so much this year. So thank you very much for your time this morning. If we've got any time for questions, I'll be delighted to take them on. But Andrew, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Probably got a couple of minutes, Simon. Thank you so much. Brilliant as always. Ladies and gents, if you do have any questions for Simon, perhaps you'd pop them in the Q&A box. There aren't any at the moment, Simon. So as always, you give such a full and frank sort of presentation. You probably cover off most of the questions. Can I just ask one, just in case we don't give people a chance to type? What do you think in terms of the economic performance of the construction sector is going to look like going forward? Have you got any insights?
Well, I mean, let's reflect on the what we know is that in the second quarter, activity levels fell very deeply indeed. 40% was the national aggregate, and most of that fall was focused on the building and house building sectors. And I don't think we've ever seen a correction like that before. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of the effects of that have not necessarily percolated through yet. So, because there's so many measures to protect companies, of insolvency and such like. So we haven't seen that. The recovery was quite strong in the third sector, but it started to tail off a little bit. And I suspect it's just quite hard to get the hiatus of orders, that the things that were effectively been put off during the second quarter, getting those moving again, commercial developers and such like having the confidence to proceed is a little bit tricky. So I do believe that we are facing a very difficult period. It will be different to what we saw in between 2008 2012, but I don't think the idea that it's going to be immediate bounce back, I think would be inappropriate, and we probably won't get back to 2019 levels of activity before end of 2022. Arcadis published a market view last week, and we've highlighting it's a two-speed industry. Infrastructure, again exemplified by HS2, is going to be extremely busy. The building sector less so, and so the ability of players in different parts of the sector to move from one to another is going to be key, and certainly that's been necessary in my business, where we've we have pivoted people out of one sector to another. So I think a bit of nimbleness is going to be quite important, and also probably realism in terms of what the nature of sort of like orders and opportunities will be like for the next year or two.
Okay. One final question that's come in then, Simon, if I may, from Andrew James. What can the CLC do about high levels of PI insurance? Do clients need to lower their expectations?
Right, that's a very good question. And just to be clear, there is a PI working group at the moment. It has about 40 people on it. It's met 4 or 5 times this year. It's chaired by Graham Watts of the CIC. It's fair to say that that group is unpicking a very complicated and very difficult environment, because one of the challenges around the PI market is that a lot of providers have withdrawn. So actually, there's the supply demand imbalance is creating a lot of the problems as well. I can't say what the solutions might be. Government is aware that there is an issue. Government also stepped into other insurance sectors earlier in the year, particularly trade credit, when that looked as if that was going to really block up the entire economy, and as an insurer of last resort. Now, whether it's an option like that for PI, I honestly don't know, but there's a recognition that something needs to be done, but I suspect.
I think
I'm back on. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah. Okay. Could you just repeat the last sentence?
Yeah. So I just have a feeling it's likely to get more difficult before it gets fixed. I would suggest, because it is such an intractable problem. It's not an easy fix.
But the good news is we've got a working party within the CLC.
There is. Yeah.
And knowing Graham Watts, if I do, it'll definitely come up to a conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
so
Simon,
Graham led the competence group. So, I mean, he's good at dealing with very intractable problems.
Simon, thank you very much once again for your time.
Thank you.
As always, insightful and beneficial. So
okay.
Thank you very much.